One of my favorite horror films to come out of the last decade is The Witch. Released in 2015, Robert Eggers' directorial debut is a fascinating marriage of 17th century folktales, fears, superstitions, and yes, a dash of the supernatural. But in its build-up, it takes a grounded approach at reacquainting us to the core elements that make up a witch. We've all seen them before. You have the creepy hut in the woods, some potion making with a rather morbid ingredient, and a broomstick. It rides the line between reality and, well, magic. And in doing so, it gets us to question whether or not everything that's happening is truly supernatural or just a case of runaway superstition. Now, there are several elements that all contribute to the strength of this film, most notably the acting, which cements the believability of the family's experience. But the shot composition and the overall tone of the film is what draws the anxiety out of us. It's also important to note that at the time of its release, The Witch, in its style of horror, was different from the popular popcorn affairs that dominated the genre in the early 2010s. You'd be hard-pressed to find any significant jump scares here, as this movie flew against the conventional tropes that had taken hold in the preceding years. And in doing so, it repopularized the idea that horror can be constructed with the right atmosphere, as opposed to relying on cheap scares. That's not to say I don't enjoy a good fun scare. There's definitely a place for movies to get us to spill our drinks, but variety is always welcome. But let's take it back to the actual movie, because I want to quickly analyze how The Witch not only forewent the use of the jump scare horror movie trope, but it twisted the concept to prey on our expectations. In horror movies, a good jump scare is crafted by leading the viewer to this inevitable conclusion using notable cues. These can be a combination of long setups, audible oddities, framing, and music, to name a few. And they are employed to help ramp up the tension, thus maximizing the scare. But the beauty of it is that these breadcrumbs don't necessarily have to lead to an unexpected scare to be successful. One of my favorite examples of this is from the movie Insidious, and if you've seen this movie, well, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. This setup takes 1 minute and 43 seconds, and during this time, I want to note two things. 1. The camera is continuously zooming in, and 2. Our three characters are slowly being framed off-center. This helps create negative space for a certain spooky demon to occupy. And lo and behold, we have our expected but incredibly effective jump scare. But let's hop on back to The Witch. We're now about halfway through the movie, at a point where that threshold between groundedness and the supernatural is more or less crossed. The scene is around 1 minute and 22 seconds long, and the majority of this time is spent on a long, steady zoom. The closer we get, the more exposed we feel because our viewpoint is narrowing. And we've been given a cue at the start of this scene that we currently have our backs to the rest of the room. And Thomason, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, leans on this expectation by expressing fear as she stares up across the room. The scene then flips to the father, played by Ralph Ineson, who's looking rather menacing, but importantly, standing off-center, thus leaving a large section of the frame in shrouded darkness. If there's anything we've learned from scary movies, it's that something should be stepping out of the shadows to give us a shot of adrenaline. And then it's over. We do get a jarring visual and audio cut, but this is more akin to us leaning back and finding that the chair has been pulled away. Robert Eggers is playing with our expectations, but more importantly, he's not allowing the tension to be resolved. And this is key because, as I stated earlier, the witch is attempting to create an atmosphere of unsettling tension instead of going for outright mayhem. You can see this employed a little later on when William has his back to the twins, which at this point are hinted to have made a pact with El Diablo, the devil. If this was in the other film, William would have been attacked or pulled into the shadows. It's there for the taking, but the movie once again shows restraint. It's not until the climax that we get that payoff, but how about we set it up first? It's the morning, the sun is shining in, and William wakes up. I need a cup of coffee, he thinks. Yeah, he needs a cup of coffee. So carefully he maneuvers over his wife so as to not wake her up. So courteous. William slips out, but not before it's revealed that Catherine, who also now has made a pact with El Diablo, is only pretending to be asleep. Oh my. Then as William walks out of the cabin, he stares out in disbelief at the carnage around the barn. Like, what the hell happened? And note, the camera is strategically positioned so that his body is always covering the doorway. That same doorway that at any second his now very much possessed wife could walk out from to attack.
Dost thou want? Wouldst thou like the taste of butter? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
But enough talk. Let's see what happens, shall we? A flank misdirection, and thus giving us a jump scare. So there is one. It's almost like this entire film was building up to this one delicious moment. The Witch will go on to receive critical acclaim and bookmark a shift in mainstream horror genre that brought back many of the techniques used by its predecessors. These slower paced horror films now exist side by side with its more rambunctious siblings, and it's for the better. The Witch is a fantastic addition to the genre that blends real-life folktales, fears, and anxieties from the 17th century and weaves them with the subtle touch of the supernatural to create a tale steeped in both the history of the place and time and our imagination. And that basically brings an end to our first stab at this Spooktacular October. And stay tuned as we continue our venture into the world of ghouls and witches, teenage angst, and that which goes bump in the night. This has been an Alpaca Thunder production. Watch out for the thing behind you, and don't forget to live deliciously. Alpaca out.
Ba.